Welcome back, YouTube, to another episode of 10 with Travis, where we take just 10 minutes a day to dive deep into the Word so you can be more equipped today than you were yesterday. In the episode yesterday, we talked about submission to government and then submission to masters. We're going to continue that thought of submission where we talk about wives submitting to husbands. And then Peter also has a word of wisdom to the husbands on how they should act and treat their wives as well. Paul did talk about this in Ephesians 6, which we went through, so we won't necessarily dive too deep into this topic, but I do think it's very interesting that both Peter and Paul talk about this, so there's definitely some things that we can take from it. So verses 1 through 6 is where it gives instructions for wives to submit to their own husband. And to go a little bit further than Paul even did, Peter talked about wives submitting to their husband even if the husband is not a believer. And now this isn't necessarily surprising that Peter would be saying this because he just talked about submission to government and masters. And not a lot of times, I guess I should say, but there are times where the government or your master, your boss, isn't a Christian. They're not believers. So you're called to submit to them regardless. Wives, you are also called to submit to your husband, whether they are a believer or not. But verse 1 does give an expectation for wives that are submitting to unbelieving husbands that just by submitting and showing that action, there's a good chance that your husband will become a believer. So it says that it can even be done without speaking a word. So it's not necessarily your words that you're going to say to your husband. It's going to be your actions that show him what a believer looks like, and that's going to kind of soften the heart for him to become a believer. So this is just a great reminder and some optimism for wives as they navigate that, because that's always a tough situation, and God will honor you for submitting to your husband, whether he is a believer or a non-believer. So verse 7 is when Peter goes and talking to the husbands. He says, "Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered." So when I heard that, that was like a wake-up call, right? Like, not that you have to be worried about how you're living and how you're treating your wife, but again, there are some situations where you need to pray, you need to feel that understanding, that revelation of, hey, I might need to change it up a little bit here, because the end of that verse says that your prayers may not be hindered. And again, all of us want to have our prayers answered, whether they're just for us or for other people, for our families. We obviously want that to happen. So first and foremost, we want to honor, understand, and consider our wife as an heir of grace, not just because we love her, which again, that's first and foremost, because we love her and she deserves that, but also because we don't want our prayers to be hindered for ourselves, for our families, for those around us. So over the last couple of sections, Peter's been talking to a specific group of people. So again, we were talking to wives, we were talking to slaves, they were talking to husbands right here. So now he's going to bring it back broad in verse 8, and he says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous." So Peter calls us to have these 5 attributes in this. And again, a lot of this is talking about and keeping the overarching theme of some suffering. So we are called to be like-minded. So that's, I don't conform to you and you don't conform to me, but together we become like-minded because we both conform to Christ. Sympathetic is the second one. The third one was love as brotherly love. The fourth one was kind-hearted or compassionate. So we're ready to move into action when people need it and our hearts are, soft for that we see that and we want to move into action. And the last one is humble and courteous. So we need to be ready to build and edify others up. So that was verse 8, and that brings us into verse 9, which says, "Not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing." So right here we see we never repay evil for evil, or we don't try to take revenge on people, but instead we want to bless them. So if someone does evil to you, you want to bless them. And that's not necessarily, at least for me, a lot of times I think of bless, I think of like financial or like giving an item. But that's not really what it's talking about here. It's just a positive statement. So blessing somebody is as they do evil to you and you go your separate ways, Lord, I pray that that person has a great day, that person gets the promotion that they want, that person is able to be safe as they drive. All that type of stuff is blessing. So as we sow that blessing, it says that we will reap a blessing for our own. And this is where we also kind of see the byproduct theory. So, you do an action and then you get something back. Again, similar to sowing and reaping, but a lot of times sowing and reaping is like sow an apple seed, get an apple tree. For us, with the byproduct theory, we think more of like, have this mindset change, and the byproduct is this. So the mindset change here is, again, it's not necessarily the act of praying, oh, if I pray for that person, then I'm going to get a blessing. No, it's always a heart transformation. So as you're willing and able in your heart and mind want to bless those that curse you, that's just when you are open and able to receive God's blessing in your own life. So going on to verses 10 through 12, which Peter actually quotes Psalm 34, 12 through 16, and it says, "He who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who are evil, who do evil." So there's 5 points that you can break down and grasp from these. So the first one is, if you desire to live and see good days, then you need to refrain from using evil words and having deceit and bad things come out of your mouth. So if that stuff is coming out of you, then it's probably deeply rooted in you, and that's just not a way to have a good life. So the second one is we must turn from evil and do good. So notice how he said turn from evil, and that's because evil's in our face. All the time evil's in our face. As you go somewhere, you can go up against evil, because that's just the world that we live in. So we have to actually turn from that and choose to do good. Third one kind of goes along with that. It says seek peace and pursue it. So again, we turn from evil, but we have to seek peace and pursue it. So we don't have to seek evil, because evil comes right to us, right? We have to turn from the evil, but then we have to, once we do that, the doing good is we're seeking peace and we're pursuing it and we're going after it. The fourth one is the Lord keeps his eyes on the righteous and hears their prayers. So again, similar to what the husbands, were called to. We just got that warning on how you can get a prayer hindered. So if you want the Lord to keep his eyes on you, be righteous. And again, we always talk about this. It's not our righteousness. It's Jesus' righteousness that God sees through us. So just accept that for your life. And the fifth one is the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So again, be careful what you're doing. Again, it should always go correct thinking goes to correct living. So if you're not having that correct living, go back to your mindset and your mental disposition. So that does it for today. Next episode we'll close out chapter 3. If you haven't read chapter 3 yet, please do so. We always want you to read beforehand, so this isn't the first time you're hearing these verses. If this channel has blessed you and you'd like to give to the network, please see the ways below. As always, comment or email. And that does it for today's episode of 10 with Travis.